for having me this morning. It's lovely to be here, and Tonbridge is a beautiful place. I was actually thinking this morning, my little sister's getting married next August, and her husband is from Tunbridge Wells, which I'm assuming it's not too far, and probably just as beautiful as here. And I'm now thinking she should actually move the wedding to Tonbridge and not have it in Bristol because it's so much greener here. So I'll be working on that when I go home. So my name's Hope, and I, as you heard, kind of campaign around eating disorders. I do a lot of speaking around this, and my real passion is to try and get society as a whole to really understand those people affected by eating disorders, but also for people to realize that no matter what they've been through in life, that things can change and things can shift, and that even in the midst of all of that pain and suffering, we can find joy in those moments along the way, but also trust that on the other side of that, there is joy. But I obviously haven't spent my life feeling like that. I've spent a lot of my life struggling with these issues, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, and to kind of take you back to that. So I am one of 5 children. I grew up in Bristol, and had a pretty kind of standard, regular upbringing. There wasn't anything particularly that stood out. But when I was about 9 years old, I really started to struggle with my emotions. I wasn't sure how to process things. I felt really unhappy a lot of the time. And my mum wasn't really sure what to do with me. I think she found the whole thing slightly frustrating. I was quite frustrated at home myself and quite angry a lot of the time. So she decided that she'd send me off for therapy. So I used to go every single Thursday for 1 hour of therapy. I'd see this woman. And I remember sitting in these therapy sessions, not really sure what I was doing, not really knowing why I was there, and thinking all of the sessions were just a complete and utter waste of time. I did that for probably around 6 months. Eventually, when it finished, I kind of went back to school and continued through the rest of junior school. Just kind of pottering along, finding my way through things. When I got to secondary school, though, things got slightly harder. My family life became slightly more dysfunctional. There was a lot of arguments at home. And being the middle child, I made it my responsibility to try and fix every single one of these situations. My older brother was very angry. He'd run away from home a lot. He'd often fight with my parents, often ending up in A&E. And I made it my responsibility to go with him when he was in an A&E, to try and sit and calm him down, just so that when we got home, before going to school the next day, we'd have these moments of peace. Around that time, when I was 12, 13 years old, I was also sexually abused by a family friend. And throughout that whole period of time, I felt completely stuck and trapped. I felt so wrong in myself. And that's the thing so much of the time when you go through abuse. You're left with these feelings that there is something categorically wrong with who you are, and that's why it's happened. But you don't have to go through abuse to feel like that. You might have that narrative in your head today. Maybe you've had it in the past. That narrative that there is something categorically wrong with who you are. And then you start looking for all of that evidence around you. Maybe no one sits with you. Maybe you don't go for coffee with people. Maybe at the end of church, you don't feel like anyone comes and gravitates and talks to you. So that narrative continues. There is something categorically wrong with you. Maybe you were bullied growing up. Maybe when you're scrolling on your phone, you don't see yourself reflected on social media. Or maybe when you're looking at the news, again, you don't see yourself in that. It could be anything like that that contributes to that feeling. And for me, I was living with that feeling every single day and had no idea what to do about it. When the abuse ended, the man went off, got married, and started his own life. But I still had these feelings. But the thing is, I didn't want to talk to anybody about what had happened. I was absolutely terrified of what would happen if I told someone. So I had to find my own way to deal with all of this emotion. And that, for me, was when I started to restrict my food intake. I started to exercise a little more. And I started to get this little voice in my head. This voice that told me every single day what I should eat, what I should drink, and how much exercise I should be doing. And the more I listened to that voice in my head, the better I felt about every single thing going on around me. It took me out of the reality of growing up. It numbed all of these emotions and also gave me this real sense of purpose. Fast forward over the next 4 years, and that voice in my head had got louder and louder and louder, and pretty much dictated every single thing that I did. Eventually, my school picked up on something being the matter with me. I got referred to the doctor. I then got referred to the Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services. And then I finally got this appointment there. And I remember going with my mum. I was so stressed and anxious about being there. I was also really embarrassed about the fact that I had to go into a mental health hospital to have this assessment. Nowadays, we talk about mental health issues so much more. We see celebrities talking about it. We've got people all over the media talking about it. We've even got people standing up and speaking about it. But it still doesn't hide the fact that there is so much stigma and judgment in those places. We all have these ideas in our heads of the kinds of people who have mental health issues, the kinds of people that go into these hospitals. And actually, the other day, even my neighbour said it to me. He was like, I used to live near one of those hospitals. You know, those kind of people that are there. You can spot them a mile off. And I was just stood there in that moment, so unsure what to say, if I'm honest. I didn't say anything about my history. I kind of carried on the conversation and moved on. Probably at some point we'll mention it, but right now I'm not really sure it was that relevant in that moment. But that's the thing, the stigma and the judgment is still there. And for me, I was so embarrassed about it that I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I sat there in this hospital with my mum sat next to me. The consultant asked me what he thought the matter was with me. And I kind of mumbled something under my breath and then sat there in complete and utter silence, staring at the floor, listening to my mum talk about all of these things. She talked a lot about the dynamics at home. She talked about the arguing at mealtimes. She talked about the fact that my dad didn't take the bins out. There was this relentless list of things that she was running through. And I think she was trying to find the solutions, trying to find what was actually going on for me. It was in my second appointment that they diagnosed me with anorexia. And I remember sitting there again thinking, like, that is not what the matter is with me. Again, we all have these images of people with eating disorders. Maybe they don't eat. Maybe they look a certain way. And I couldn't fit myself into that neat little bracket. So I just thought they'd kind of plucked this thing from thin air. I spent 6 months going to CAMS, going every single week as an outpatient. Every single week, sitting there and basically lying my way through these appointments. Pretending like I was fine. Life's fine, everything's just fine. But actually, in those moments, I was finding life really, really difficult. I thought it'd be easier, though, to just say that I was fine, that maybe people would start to back off a little bit. Over that 6 months, I lied so much during those appointments that there were moments when people thought that actually I was getting better, and people started to back off a little bit. But I think my biggest fear was that they were going to take away this one thing in my life that made me feel better. Eventually, after 6 months, it was about 5 months in, and I remember my mum came to school to pick me up a little bit too early. I didn't have time to get myself all prepared for my session. I remember getting to the hospital, feeling so anxious and so on edge. I walked into the appointment, got weighed, and within minutes they'd realised that I'd lied to them for the last 5 months or so. Over the next 4 weeks, life kind of picked up speed slightly. My mum, my school, everyone was basically tracking my every single move. My mum would turn up at the gym if I was there. My school would ring my mum if I'd missed lessons or wasn't having something to eat. And I was constantly being watched, and I absolutely hated it. Every single evening, I'd pretty much cry myself to sleep. I'd have these moments of release where I'd just be sat there in the shower with the water pouring all over me, just praying that something would change the next day, praying that something would just be completely different when I'd get up the next morning. I'd go to bed, then my alarm would go. I'd get up, I'd get dressed, pulling on my tracksuit bottoms, going downstairs, open the fridge, but my brain just did not let me start to eat. And eventually, after that 6 months, I was admitted to a mental health hospital, where I then spent the next year of my life in recovery. So learning a lot about food, learning a lot about exercise, but actually the biggest thing for me in that moment was actually learning to talk and process things. When you recover from an eating disorder, whatever type of eating disorder it is, you have to have the right nutritional support to make sure that your brain can rewire, but you also have to have that therapy alongside it. And for me, I was extremely lucky because whilst I didn't have evidence-based treatment, I had this year in hospital where everything was being monitored, where I was on this kind of routine and structure, We'd get up at the same time every day. We'd have our meals throughout the day. We had visitors in the evening if we'd done what we were told throughout the day. And whilst that structure doesn't work for everybody, for me in that moment, it was what I needed to actually start to kind of kickstart my recovery and start to get better. So after that year in treatment, I was discharged. I went straight to university, so I took my A-levels in hospital, mainly because I wanted to have a completely fresh start away from everybody. But when I got to uni, I was still in that kind of institutionalized structure. And I pretty much lived like that for the next 3 years or so, having my meal times at the same time. And my uni friends couldn't quite understand why I had to have dinner at 6 o'clock every single night. But I was too afraid not to do that because I thought, do you know what, if I'm not going to do that, then actually what's going to happen to my recovery? And then pretty much ever since then, I've been in this kind of ongoing state of recovery. I'd now say that I'm probably in the best place I've ever been in my recovery. I think for me, what's really helped actually is having 2 children. My first child, I had a few issues around my pregnancy, and again, kind of going through that when you're still kind of managing recovery from an eating disorder had its own challenges. But actually with my second, it's been so much more plain sailing. And I really believe that every single person who has an eating disorder, every single person who has an addiction, can get to a space where they can fully recover and have a life completely away from this. So for me, my faith has been something that's been kind of intertwined throughout all of this. I was actually sexually abused within a church environment. And whilst I continued going to church, basically because my family did, up until I was 18, I'd completely lost my love of that environment. I used to go every single week, mainly to just meet people, hang out with my friends, but wasn't really invested in it. When I went to uni, I went a couple of times, but at that point, I pretty much just completely pulled away from it. I'd had moments since then, I think, where I'd kind of, before becoming a Christian again, where I'd prayed and wanted like these immediate answers. I wanted to be immediately fixed. And even when I was in hospital, people used to come and pray for me. But I never, ever had that moment where I was just fixed overnight. And that was what I was so desperate for. I used to bargain with God when I was in bed in hospital, saying, do you know what, if you just come tonight, just fix me, get me out of hospital, then I'll do X, Y, and Z over the next couple of weeks. Keep doing that. But it never worked. And I didn't understand why it wasn't working. In 2016, 2019, I ended up going on an Alpha course. So I'd been through a court case around the abuse that happened to me as a child and was basically just at a complete loss at life. I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt completely alone and isolated with it. And I just felt really stuck. And my godmother, who is wonderful, basically had been kind of nagging me for kind of months and months, if not years, to go back and do an Alpha course. So I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to do it. And then it will make her be quiet. Then she can kind of back off a little bit. We can then go back to talking about other things. And then it will just all be great. So I went into this church. I went to HTB one Sunday afternoon. And I sat there at the back of the church. This is before I'd signed up to the Alpha course. And I was kind of looking around at everybody else in there. I was very set on not wanting to make friends with anyone. She sat at the back and was in and out quite quickly. But what really, really took kind of interest for me was that everybody was just in it. People were just completely losing themselves in this service, like singing, dancing, you name it, anything. And I was fascinated by that. I couldn't get my head around it. I'd grown up in a church which wasn't like that at all. And so it was interesting kind of seeing that other side of it. I ended up doing the Alpha course through HTB. And again, like I said, went into it thinking that, you know what, I'm just going to go in there and just prove every single person wrong. I pretty much argued for the first 5 or 6 weeks or so. We then went on an Alpha weekend, which again, I did for the social part of it, again, to kind of try and cause a bit of a fuss. There was a couple of people in my group similar to me in that sense. But on that weekend, someone stood up at the front and shared their experience of having an eating disorder. And I'd never really met anybody at that point who would talk so openly about it outside of like a really small network of people. She was also an older woman, and again, I couldn't really understand why someone at that age would be talking about it as well. I was kind of taken aback a little bit. I sat down with her afterwards and decided actually in that moment I really wanted to try again and try and become a Christian. But if I'm honest, there was part of me, and I think part of me that told myself that if I did it, then maybe I'd be fixed at that point. Maybe life would just be working out and everything would be okay. And over the next 3 or 4 weeks or so, things were really great. I wasn't kind of micromanaging my food. I wasn't stressing about what I was having. I felt like I was actually getting to a space where maybe God was healing me. But then it came back. Again, the pandemic hit. Life got really challenging again. I was still desperate to have that moment where I was completely free of it. But I think for me, what shifted over the next couple of months, and I think particularly during that kind of first bit of the pandemic for me, was I had to make a decision in those moments. I had to make a decision whether I was going to choose to kind of make this commitment and choose to kind of keep working on myself, but also keep focusing on having a faith. Or whether I was just going to sack off both things and just do what I wanted to do. And I realized that actually for me, having an eating disorder, whilst it's not a choice, it was something that had never ever made me happy. I'd never got to quite where I wanted to be. The numbers on the scales had never hit that number I thought I wanted to get to. I'd never restricted quite enough to not be completely consumed by guilt. So I kind of thought in those moments during the pandemic, there must be another way. There must be something else that maybe that thing that could help me. So for me, during that whole period, I had to find a way to keep hanging on to having faith. And for me, it was a really practical thing. It meant getting up every single day and getting out of bed and saying, do you know what, I'm going to choose to follow that faith today. I'm going to choose to trust God, even in these messy bits. I'm going to choose to keep relying on him, despite the fact that I still feel really stuck in so many ways. One thing that I've had to really navigate along the way, and I think arguably this might be one of the most important things for everybody, is to think about actually how the church can support those people affected by eating disorders or other types of mental health issues. For some reason, churches have this obsession with putting on food. I don't know if your church does it, but pretty much at every single event. We use it as a way to try and attract people to come to things. Come to Alpha, you're going to get a meal. Come to this coffee morning, we're going to serve loads and loads of pastries or whatever it might be. But whilst we're doing that, we're also, a lot of us, all justifying our food choices. We're normalizing those unhealthy relationships with food. Maybe this morning, some of you have even had those conversations already. Maybe you've turned around to someone and said, do you know what, I'm going to have that pastry because I know that later on I'm not going to have lunch or I'm going to go to the gym later. And again, all of these really harmless conversations, they actually create an environment where it becomes really, really toxic for other people who might be struggling with food. And where, as a church, as society, again, we start to normalize eating disorders. We need to be thinking about actually how we can create a space where not only can people come and be really messy, be really unsure about where things are going, but also where people feel safe enough to come. One of my biggest fears about doing the Alpha course was actually the food that they were going to serve. I knew that they had a meal at the start of every single week. I didn't know if I should just arrive a little bit early, whether I should sneak off during that time and have my dinner in a little Tupperware in the toilet, just so that I'd had something. I ended up actually coming up with an arrangement with the person who ran my group, who would text me on that Wednesday morning and tell me what they were having for the meal. A really simple, basic thing to do, but actually for me, it meant that I was able to come. So it's thinking about those sort of things. And then I think as individuals, particularly for me, it's thinking about actually what I can do on that day-to-day basis to really stay grounded and rooted in my faith, but alongside my recovery as well. What does that look like? And for me, there are really practical things. I mentioned one earlier about getting up in the mornings and saying, do you know what, I'm going to choose to do this. And again, that's something that I have to do on a day-to-day basis. I run an organization which we have to get funding for. We go out all the time. And I'm probably slightly overambitious in the things I commit to doing before that funding's come in. I ended up recently, when we went on holiday, was walking down the beach, and pretty much every step I was like, right, I'm going to choose to trust God with this. I'm going to choose to trust God with it. And I probably sound slightly mad and a little bit all over the place, but actually for me, saying it out loud and having that declaration really, really helps. I'm also really conscious of surrounding myself with the right people. People who get it, people who get that messy in-between bit. And then allowing myself that space to feel it. And some days for me, that might mean that I just put on some worship music at home. Some days, some weeks, I go weeks sometimes without even being able to look at the Bible at points. At the moment, I'm also on a scroll fast, which probably sounds like I'm also addicted to my phone, and I would say I'm not. My husband might probably say I am. But again, kind of taking that time out where we're really committed to challenging ourselves and working on things a little bit more. So for me, I want to close with, I guess, a couple of things. The first thing is it's really, really hard. Life is really, really messy, and it really, really sucks in so many ways for so many of us. So many of us are carrying so much baggage along the way. Sometimes it can feel like we're never, ever going to see the other side of that. And seriously, if you'd asked me 6, 7 years ago if I'd be sharing my experience, talking about the fact that I was in this amazing space in my recovery, if you'd asked me if I'd ever have children, these were things that I never dreamed would be possible. And they are, and we have to hold on to that and trust that on the other side of things, things can be different. But we also have to find a way to be honest with each other and actually start to share a little bit about what's going on. So I wasn't going to do this, and I'm very conscious of time, but I'm just going to do a really quick thing. I actually normally do this in schools, but I think let's try it today. So if you feel comfortable and able to, if you could shut your eyes or look directly at the floor in front of you. Perfect. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back to a church service. Maybe over the last couple of months, maybe last year. Pick the service in your head. It might even be today. It was one of those Sunday mornings where you were feeling really, really just fed up with life. Maybe you'd had a really frustrating week. Maybe, if you have children, you couldn't get them out of the house fast enough, and you were getting really, really annoyed and frustrated. And then you were feeling guilty because you were getting annoyed and you were going to church. Maybe you'd lost a loved one. Maybe you'd lost your job. Or maybe you were just struggling with things that were going on and everything was just feeling like it was getting a little bit too much. You'd been feeling like this probably for the last couple of days. Maybe even the last few church services you'd come, kind of hoping and praying that you'd have a moment in that service where something would work out. Maybe you were desperate to just feel something. Maybe you wanted someone to stand at the front and have a word that was specifically for you that resonated in that moment, but it hadn't happened. Again, you maybe were bargaining with God around what this might look like. You came through the front doors of church. You grab your coffee, your water, and you head to your seat. Everyone was kind of mulling around, chatting. You sit throughout that service, feel like maybe something shifted slightly, but you're still holding out for that one thing to just change, something that will just fix whatever you're feeling. That kind of dull ache in your stomach where you're not really fine, but you're not really sure what it is, perhaps. At the end of the service, everyone stands up, everyone heads off to get a coffee. And again, you're kind of mulling around, debating whether you go and talk to someone about how you're feeling. A couple of people come, say hi, check in with you. I want you to go back to that moment where you're all standing around, sitting around, having coffee, kind of taking it all in. And I want you to put your hand up. If in that moment, if someone asked you how you were feeling, whether you would honestly be able to tell them what was going. If there was one person that you felt like you could share that with, I want you to put your hand up. Perfect. And then going back to that same day, if there's someone outside of church, perhaps when you get home, or perhaps someone you could kind of message, that you feel like you could share those feelings with. Perfect. You can put your hands down and you can open your eyes. So I'm not doing this to shame you as a congregation or to embarrass anyone. But in that first question, there was only 11 people in this room who feel like you can be 100% honest in that messiness with someone else here. There was only 13 people that have that person maybe outside of church, and a lot of those 11 were the same as the 13. The reality is, this is what we're living in at the moment. There are so many of us who get up every single day, and we feel just fed up maybe with life. I was thinking it recently, actually, and one of the reasons I'm doing a scroll fast is because I felt myself longing for something else. I didn't quite know what it was, but I could kind of feel myself getting absorbed into something else, something that wasn't really satisfying me, making me feel like maybe something in my life isn't quite right. I also get very preoccupied with what my sense of purpose for my life is. I get obsessed over things like that because I want to be doing it right. I also have those moments, again, where I wouldn't probably talk to people about what I'm feeling, and that probably sounds very hypocritical given the fact that I'm standing here. But I find it unbelievably difficult to do it at points too. It's so much easier to pretend you're fine, to just say you're fine. Someone else has probably got it worse than you. We tell ourselves all of these things. But we need to find a way to create a community where every single one of us can talk to each other. Find those people. It's not about talking to every single person about what you're going through, but it is about identifying that handful of people that maybe you can have that really honest conversation with, people that you can sit down and pray with, people who you can check in with. And what I really hope off the back of today is maybe you can start to think about what that might look like for you. Maybe if something's come up for you in the talk, thinking about who you can send a text to, who you can sit down with afterwards. Again, working out what that looks like for you. And maybe that is starting off looking at a helpline or something online, but creating that sort of environment as well. Because what I can promise you is that when you have those people that you can start to be more honest with, when you're surrounding yourself with the right people, they can help you get through that messy bit, find that joy and laughter along the way, and then help you trust that on the other side of that fear, that everything else will be okay.